Folks, welcome, especially welcome to those of you who are here for the first time. If you're here for the first time, can you raise your hand? Wow! That's showing of the year as far as new members. Also, this is a joint Holden Field Humanist community and Café Scientifique group. So if you're reserved to Café Scientifique, raise your hand. If you're reserved to a Holden Field Humanist community, raise your hand. Okay, so if you belong to both, raise your hand too. Okay, so anyway, thank you for coming. And I let Richard do the introduction. Before I do that, I want to point out that I saw Jeffrey speak at OEC back in January, and I was impressed by his talk. And Richard was the organizer, so that's one of the reasons I'm letting Richard do the introduction, because he did a good job last time. Okay, and he encouraged me to invite Jeffrey, and I was very happy I did that.
Okay, so welcome. Thank you very much. This is a wonderful turnout. Thank you for coming out to the Hall Field Humanist Community /FXCTV. This presentation of statistics professor at the U of T, Jeffrey Rosenthal. Now, I was, as George said, I presented Jeff at OEC for the Humanist Association of Toronto back in January, I guess, January, February, early in the year. So I was really impressed with the talk, and I think you're really going to enjoy it too. You may know Jeffrey from his involvement with the lottery scandal in Ontario back a couple of years ago. Did some work on that, and also on CBC and various other media outlets. He also produced a wonderful book previous to this, Struck by Lightning, The Curious World of Probabilities. So Jeff is a very dynamic speaker, and I'm sure we're going to really enjoy his talk this evening. So without further ado, I wish to present you Professor Jeffrey Rosenthal. With his book.
Okay, well, thank you very much. Hello, everybody. So it's nice to be here. It's always nice to speak to humanist groups, because I support a lot of the goals. And in fact, my first contact with the humanist movement was we got a humanist officiant to join my marriage when I got married to my wife, and we were looking for an alternative to standard religious options. And I think it went pretty well, because this fall we'll be celebrating our 20th wedding anniversary. So that was Terry Hope, if any of you know. She was our officiant way back then, almost 20 years ago. And so yeah, it's good for me to be here. So I thought I'd start by telling you, we got some crisis on the camera here, but I thought I'd start by telling you a little about myself. So I'm a professor of statistics. I'm sure you're all excited to hear that. And so a lot of my work is pretty technical. So a typical day for me is working on mathematical equations, something like this, and trying to work out mathematics of Monte Carlo computer algorithms and other things. But at some point I realized that not everybody was as excited as I was by these kind of equations. So I actually ended up writing a book, as we just mentioned, a book for the general public called Struck by Lightning, The Curious World of Probabilities. I actually have a few copies of it available here, which if anybody's interested, you can buy for $20 cash all in, which is a slight reduction off the list price. But anyway, so I wrote this book some years ago, and to everyone's surprise, especially mine, the book actually did quite well. It made some bestseller lists, it was translated into a number of languages, and as a result, I got to speak to lots of different groups of people like you, and I also got to do lots of media interviews. And so some of the things that I was interviewed by the media about, I'll just sort of mention, because they illustrate the breadth of probability and randomness and how it comes up so often. So, for example, things like public opinion polls, when there's an election coming, and they do a random sample, but how random is it, how accurate is it, what are those margins of error, and those plus or minus 1% and all that. So I've done a lot of interviews about that. Things like crime statistics and safety issues of, I think getting more dangerous, less dangerous, what are your chances of being a victim of a serious crime. Things like, this is an interesting case of pedestrian death counts that were higher than average 1 month, and the question was that just random chance, or was that a sign that things were getting worse? Actually, I'll come back to that one at some point. issues of how to make decisions. So when random things happen to us that are beyond our control, and we have to decide, are we going to risk it? Are we going to have an outdoor party even though it might rain? Are we going to take the bus even though it might be late? All those things. So I've talked about those kind of things. This was actually the game show called Deal or No Deal. Some of you may have known it, and they asked me to figure out my strategy using mathematics and compare it to what the people on the show actually did. Fortunately, it worked out pretty well, so I did pretty well on that one. That was good. Sports statistics comes up a lot. This is the so-called March Madness American College Basketball Tournament from a few years ago when they had me do a statistical analysis trying to rank the teams and trying to predict how they were going to do. And in fact, it's very appropriate today because I don't know how many basketball fans are in the audience, but if some of you saw the incredible finish to the Raptors Game 7 2 nights ago, had a few fans. So I was watching that live and I was amazed by it. And then yesterday I did an interview with City TV about some of the probabilities related to that. So sports stuff comes up a lot. This is about the roll up the rim contest for Tim Hortons. So I get asked about all sorts of things that involve randomness and probability. And also a lot of things involving lotteries. And turned out I didn't expect this, but when I wrote a book about probabilities and I was doing stuff in the media, what I got asked about more than anything else was lottery probabilities. Right? Whenever the lottery jackpot would get high, it's like, hey, what are the chances I'm going to win the jackpot? Right? And so lots and lots of interviews related to lotteries. And that even led to what was actually just briefly mentioned, this so-called lottery retailer scandal, which is a few years ago now, but was a sort of amazing story. Some of you may have heard, how many of you heard about that lottery retailer scandal? Some of you, and it was this issue that people who worked in the store selling the lottery tickets were sometimes managing to take the winning tickets, which actually belonged to the customers, and cash them in themselves. There was one case that was known of this older gentleman who played the same numbers every week, and one week they told him he hadn't won anything, but then the store owner actually cashed in a $250,000 ticket herself, and there was a court battle that went on for years, but then the Fifth Estate of the CBC thought there might be more to the story, so they had me investigate some of the statistics. We said, yeah, there's got to be more fraud, and it became this huge front-page news lead story on every newscast. And that had all sorts of consequences, like the CEO of the Ontario Lottery Corporation ended up getting fired, so somebody had to be the fall guy. It's the first time my statistical calculations led to the firing of a CEO. It was debated in the Ontario legislature. This is from the official Hansard record, and actually mentioned me and my probability numbers. That's the first time that I've ever been mentioned in the Hansard too. And it caused policy changes, like now they have these self-checker machines, so even if you don't want to actually check your numbers, you can stick it in the machine and check it yourself before you give your ticket to anybody else. And you're supposed to sign the ticket before you give it to the store owner. So all these new rules came in. Eventually the police investigated and it led to criminal charges, and here's a case of, there are several cases, but this is the biggest one because there was a $12.5 million prize that had been cashed in by 3 people who owned a convenience store, but they had their suspicions that maybe they hadn't really purchased that ticket and they'd gotten it from a customer, and eventually they were able to prove that and they were arrested. They ended up going to jail for criminal fraud, so pretty serious. And then they said, who really owns this money? They didn't know who the $12.5 million went to. So they basically put out a call saying, excuse me, does anybody think you might have won $12.5 million? And eventually they found that this group of 7 working class people who had certain patterns of buying lottery tickets which fit in with the patterns corresponding to these lottery numbers. They got $12.5 million plus interest with almost $15 million. A lot of consequences, and that all came just from pretty simple statistical analysis involving probabilities and randomness, right? Saying it was just too unlikely that the store owners were winning so many of these lottery tickets by chance alone. So that's kind of background for where it brings me here. I was giving, like I said, everything's going great. I was doing outreach and publicity. I was giving a lot of talks, and I was, collaborating. It led to, meeting new people from different departments and doing different research collaborations. I did some work with some legal scholars, all sorts of things that grew out of this public work. So I thought, wow, it's a whole extra side of things. And then every once in a while, I get a lot of different questions at my talks and so on. Every once in a while, there'd be a talk that was something like, yeah, but do you believe in luck? And that's one of those questions that's a little hard. I found it a little hard to handle, right? Because most questions I got to be, pretty good at handling the questions. But then, do you believe in luck? Well, what does that mean, right? What does it mean to believe in luck? What is luck? I mean, I know probability and randomness and so on, but luck, is and so on. So I had some experience with questions, and I would try to deflect the question, right? I'd say, well, what do you mean? How should I respond? And often I would kind of ignore the question, right? Like maybe maybe I can change it around to some question that I am more comfortable with, like, oh, you're really asking about crime statistics, or you're really asking about polls. But at some point I thought, well, maybe I couldn't just keep on changing the topic, so I decided to write another book. And that book just came out a few months ago, and it's called Knock on Wood, and it was my attempt as a statistician to say, well, okay, so I'm not just talking about the mathematics of probability and statistics now, I'm trying to confront this issue of what do people mean when they say, hey, do you believe in luck? So that's kind of what I want to talk about today. And you know, as a statistician, I have certain perspective and certain opinions, and you as humanists probably share some of those perspectives. But then a lot of people believe a lot of different things related to luck, right? So what can I say about that? Well, so one thing you could mean by luck, and I think a lot of times people do, is just any events which are outside of our direct control and which have a significant influence on us, right? So, you know, good things can happen. You know, maybe you can win the lottery is obviously a good example of good luck. But also, you know, you can fall in love with someone that you just happen to meet because you just happen to go to just the right place at just the right time. You can get a job because you just happen to have just the qualifications that they were looking for. So things can work out well, not necessarily because you planned them, but because you got lucky, right? And of course, really bad things can happen. I mean, horrible things like getting cancer or being in an accident, and things where sometimes just a split second, if only I'd been 1 second later, everything would have been fine, right? So all sorts of things can happen to us. So you have terrible crimes that you say, well, you know, it wasn't anything I controlled, and it was just really good luck or really bad luck, right? And some of them are things that actually sort of affect the course of history. So I give a number of examples in the book, but what I'll mention now is a story called The Luck of Kokura. Some of you might know what that is. So that's a story that takes place on August 9th, 1945. Probably a lot of you know what happened on August 9th, 1945. That was right at the end of the Second World War. And it was the date that the Americans dropped an atom bomb on Japan for the second time. What you may or may not know is that the plan was to drop the bomb on the mid-sized Japanese city of Kokura. And that morning they assembled their planes and they were taking that atom bomb to drop on Kokura. And one of the planes was late getting into position. By the time they were ready to go, a few hours had passed and they were running a little low on fuel. And they got a report that in Kokura, the clouds had moved in. It was cloudy, it was difficult to see, they couldn't get a good visual. They said, you know, this isn't good, we better choose a secondary target. And they didn't have much fuel left. They said, well, there's one secondary target, which is only about 100 miles away to the south or southwest, which is called Nagasaki. And they went to Nagasaki, and I'm sure I don't have to tell you that there were tens of thousands of people killed instantly from that atom bomb. And there were tens of thousands more who died from radiation poisoning in the weeks and months following in Nagasaki, and the people of Kokura were spared. So the Japanese have an expression, the luck of Kokura. And so, you know, tens and tens of thousands of lives were affected, both good and bad, because the clouds had rolled in. Right? So people say, hey, do you believe in luck? Yeah, I believe in luck, right? That's luck on a grand scale. It's incredible impact of just really minor random things that we couldn't control, like the clouds moving in. So, yeah, I believe in luck, but the problem is, that's not always what they need, right? They say, well, no, we're not asking about that. But then the question is, what are you asking about, right? You say, okay, fine, so you're not asking about that, what do you mean? Well, usually what they're thinking is something like, was it just random? Was it just random that, you know, you got in an accident, or your friend got cancer, or you won the lottery? Or, and that's where it gets really interesting, because the question is, or what? So somehow when people ask that, they're meaning things like, did it have a meaning, right? Or a purpose, or a cause? Was it controlled by some sort of, supernatural force? And people talk about things like, there's superstition or astrology. People talk about, things like extrasensory perception, or just these words like fate or destiny, or, you deserved it, you had it coming. All these different concepts somehow related to saying it's not just random, right? It's, there's some magical cause for all these things. So, what can we say about that, right? And I'm sure we've all confronted this kind of thing in different forms. And you say, well, what can we say about these things that happen that have this big effect on us that are outside of our control? Are they just random? Do they have meaning or what? So, and in particular, as a statistician, what can I say? Well, that's what I sort of grappled with trying to write this book, right? And when writing this book, I didn't want to just preach to the converted. That is, I didn't want to just say, those people are all stupid and we're all so much smarter than they are, which I'm sure a lot of people feel that way a lot, and I feel that way sometimes. But I sort of said, well, how can we try to find common ground with people who might have, very strong and very different beliefs about these magical forces? And I realized that in some ways I have more in common with them than I might have thought, because when you think about fiction, I realized that when it comes to fictional stories, sometimes the most interesting things are the things that do have a magical or a supernatural element. So I'll just mention a few examples. So first of all, I'll mention is an older movie called Serendipity. Some of you may know, with John Cusack and Kate Beckinsale, and it's a romantic comedy, right? It's a rom-com. And every rom-com pretty much follows the same formula, right? What's that formula? Well, early on we meet a man and a woman, and we know that they're meant for each other, right? It's fate, they have to get together, and the whole rest of the movie is all the silly obstacles that get in the way before they finally get together, right? So, this movie I mentioned in particular, though, because they make it even more explicit, because early on, sure enough, this man and woman meet, and they're in this office building in New York City, and she says, here's what we're going to do. We're going to go into 2 separate elevators, and we're each going to choose a floor at random. And if we choose the same floor, that means we were meant to be together. So she rushes off, goes in the elevator, and he goes in his elevator. She picks floor 25, and he picks floor 25. So right away we know they're meant to be together, right? Now in the movie, well, some kid gets on the elevator that the guy's on and presses all these other buttons, so by the time he finally gets to the 25th floor, she's already gone, and they spend, months of years trying to find each other before they finally do. But the point is, we know right away, right? Because there's this supernatural power in the movies and the rom-coms that people have faith they have to get together, right? So, and that's what makes it interesting, right? The play Macbeth, William Shakespeare. It's actually my favorite Shakespeare play, and you probably know it's got, among other elements, these 3 old witches, right? And these witches make prophecies, and these prophecies are about who's going to become king and whose children are going to become king and who's going to kill who and so on. And somehow all these prophecies have to come true. And that's what makes it interesting. And in real life, if some 3 crazy old ladies were making prophecies, you might not expect them to come true, right? But what makes the play interesting is because we know they have to somehow, by some contorted logic, they have to come true. The book Shoeless Joe by W.P. Kinsella was later made into the movie Field of Dreams starring Kevin Costner. And it has the famous saying, if you build it, he will come. And what? So this Iowa corn farmer hears that voice, if you build it, he will come. And he knows he has to clear away his cornfield, and he has to build a baseball diamond so that magically these mystical baseball players will start appearing. And eventually Shoeless Joe Jackson, who's his hero, but who's dead at this point, but he will magically reappear. And eventually his own father will reappear as the catcher on the team. And all these magical things happen because he hears this voice, and that's what makes it interesting, right? I'll mention a couple others quickly. This is an interesting one. It's an older movie called The Cooler, starring W.H. Macy. Some of you may have seen it. And it takes place in Las Vegas, right? And there are these evil mob bosses who control the casinos, and they want to make sure that nobody wins too much money at their casino. So they hire this guy, the William H. Macy character. They hire him to go to their casinos. Why? Because he's such an unlucky guy. He's been unlucky his whole life. Nothing's ever gone right for him. He's so unlucky that if somebody's winning money at the casino, he just has to go and stand near them. And his unluckiness will exude over the gambler, and the gambler will start losing. And that's taken as a given, and then the whole movie's about, well, partially he ends up falling in love, so now he's not so unlucky anymore, so it doesn't work, and the mob bosses beat him up, and all sorts of crazy things happen, but it's just taken as given. He's really unlucky. He has this unluckiness property, right? This magical property. And again, without that, it wouldn't be much of a movie. I'll just quickly mention one more, which is the movie The Sixth Sense. Probably some of you know, with the famous words, I see dead people, right? And there's a young boy who has this magical ability to communicate with and to see people who are already dead. And I mentioned this one in particular because I read an interview with the director. I guess I saw a video of an interview with the director after the movie came out. And he was interviewed, and he said, I think every great movie, every truly great movie, has an element of magic in it. And I don't think that's true. I think there's lots of good movies that don't have any magic in it. But nonetheless, there are a lot of movies and books and TV and everything that has some sort of magical element into it. And often that's the most exciting, interesting, and fun part of the show. And I think it does speak to a real need or a connection that humans have with a search for sort of magic. So I talk in the book about, we have a sort of fascination with or love of magical, mystical, supernatural forces. So that's, something that maybe we have in common and that we should appreciate even in people who have a different perspective from us. But that's all in fiction, right? And then you say, yeah, but what about real life, right? And probably we're interested in real life here. So, of course, in real life, a lot of people believe a lot of these things, right? So there's things like lucky charms, rabbit's feet, and horseshoes that ward off the devil, and things like, wishbone that summons the magic of these birds who have these magical properties. So there's all sorts of things we believe, some people believe bring us good luck. All sorts of actions, you cross your fingers, you're creating a spot for the spirits to congregate, or if you touch wood or knock on wood, which became the title of the book, you're trying to summon spirits, which are ancient spirits, which are believed to reside in trees, and all these sort of magical things. And of course, unlucky things, if you spill salt, well, supposedly salt was spilled at the Last Supper when Jesus was betrayed, so that's a bad omen, and all sorts of different things that people will believe. Astrology was mentioned, I think, in our pre-talk discussion, and one survey in Britain said 21% of people said they read their horoscopes regularly and are influenced by them. So, again, it's magic stuff that people believe. I'll come back to horoscopes, actually. Of course, if you meet someone in a bar, you're supposed to say, what's your sign, right? So it's a common thing a lot of people will believe. Romance is a really interesting thing because I find even a lot of people who are mostly really logical, they're free thinkers and they're skeptics and humanists and so on, scientists, but they say, well, but when I met my life partner, that wasn't just random. That was, we were meant to be together, it was important, it was fate, it wasn't just a total randomness that we happened to meet each other. So people will believe those kind of things, and you say, what can we say? First of all, skeptics and humanists, and me as a statistician, what can we say about all this, right? So, well, let me talk about a few personal stories. Well, a couple personal stories and then some general stories. So here's one where I was at a party. Well, actually, at first I was at a party where the host said, everybody at this party has to recite some poetry. Great, So what can I do? I said, well, I already mentioned that Macbeth was my favorite play, and I memorized a soliloquy in high school. So, okay, this might be good. So I did it. I said, is this a dagger I see before me, the handle toward my hand? And I went on from there, right, to the whole Macbeth soliloquy. And, people liked it. I got some applause. I said, okay, that went pretty well. But then later I was at another gathering, and the host of that party introduced me to a friend of hers and said, oh, this is my friend Jeff. He did a great job of reciting a soliloquy from Macbeth at my party. And she looked horrified. Said, but didn't you have bad luck? And of course she was referring to the tradition that some of you may know that the Macbeth play is cursed, right? And if you can say the name of it or quote from it or make any reference to it, that will lead to bad luck. And so, they maybe refer to it as the Scottish play or as Macbeth, but you can't possibly say the name. So she was convinced, since I quoted from Macbeth, I was going to have bad luck. And I said, well, no, I don't think I really particularly had bad luck. I tried to be polite. I don't really believe in the curse, right? She said, oh yeah? Well, my daughter didn't believe in the curse either, and she quoted from Macbeth. And then the next week she was going on a trip, and she discovered that her passport had expired. And so to her, that was proof, right? So this is an example where I try to think in the book about, how people get this sort of proof, and I talk about what I call luck traps, which are ways that we can be led, or some people could be led to believe certain things have a cause that they might not have, and in this case, I call this an extra large target. That is, if you're going to say, you believe something's going to cause bad luck, but your definition of bad luck is so broad that it includes things like an expired passport that, minor inconvenience, well, you're always going to find that, right? If I can get through a whole week and the worst thing that happened to me is an expired passport, I actually had a pretty good week, right? So there's a lot of things. So if you're going to have such an extra large target, you're going to always find the confirmation you're looking for. So I talk in the book about how you have to, clearly define your parameters and not just have such an extra large target. That's one way people will fall for these luck traps. And by the way, just to finish that story, since you were so amused, I said to her after, they said, well, okay, so the passport had expired 2 years earlier, right? So which she told me. So you know, how could that have really been caused by your reading for Macbeth the previous week or whatever? And she said, it's not a question of cause and effect. So to her, you know, that was the belief, and of course she found the belief where she was looking for it. I mentioned those pedestrian deaths before, so I told you some years ago I was, you know, contacted by the media because they said there were more pedestrian deaths than usual, and is this, you know, a trend, is this the start of something new, or was this just random luck? And that was a case where I looked at the probabilities a bit, and we have, you know, probability descriptions for things like that, which, you know, any one person, it's extremely rare that they would be caught in an accident, but there's lots and lots of possible people that could be caught. So that's related to what are called Poisson distribution or Poisson clumping, some of you may know. But anyway, so the point is I could work out the probabilities, and in that case I said, yes, we had definitely more pedestrian deaths than you'd expect, and of course that's tragic, but I worked out the probabilities, and I said approximately once every 5 years, we might expect to have a month which has this many pedestrian deaths in it. So it was rare, but it wasn't extremely rare, and it certainly didn't seem any evidence that circumstances had changed. And so I call this luck trap sometimes related to what I call the hidden help luck trap, and by that, in this case, it's these Poisson clumping probabilities, but in general, it's just saying, well, the way probabilities work isn't always the way we have intuition. You know, just because there's a certain average number of something like pedestrian deaths doesn't mean you'll have the same number every month. You'll have some random fluctuation, and that's to be expected just by chance alone. So I said this in the media. I was quoted as saying, no, it's all Poisson clumping, and interestingly, the next month I was, you know, worried because I thought maybe there will be a lot more pedestrian deaths every month, and really it is something new, and I'll look foolish. But then I finally got some data for the following month, and sure enough, there were the usual, or even a little bit less than the usual number of pedestrian deaths after that. So I thought, okay, I've been vindicated. But there was not a single media article about that. Right? Once the spike had passed, nobody talked about it anymore, even though I think it proved that it was just Poisson clumping. So those are a couple of my stories, and this idea of thinking of, you know, luck traps, or how we can use perspective and statistics to try to say some things don't necessarily prove these magical forces that we think they do. But what about, there's sort of more amazing stories that, you know, you hear about on the news and so on. So I mentioned a number of them in the book, but I'll just mention two here. And here's a story that was in the media about these two people. So what happened here? So we had this guy here. When he was a young boy, he was 10 years old. He was at his brother's baseball game, and he was hanging out before the game on the baseball diamond. And another kid was practicing swinging a bat, and he didn't see this kid behind him. And he swung the bat, and it hit this kid in the chest so hard that his heart stopped beating. And it was, oh my God, his heart stopped beating, help, help. And this woman, she was in the stands, she was the mother of one of the players on the other team. She came running down. She said, I'm a nurse. Let me help. So she runs down. She performs a CPR on the kid. And sure enough, it works. His heart starts beating again. And he's actually fine. Whew. 7 years later, that woman's at a restaurant. She takes a big bite of food. She swallows badly. So please be careful if you're eating now. But she swallows badly. Chokes on her food. Can't breathe. I can't breathe, can't breathe. So what are we going to do? She can't breathe. Hey, the guy in the kitchen, who works in the kitchen, he's a volunteer firefighter. Maybe he can help. So they call the kid. He comes running out. He performs a Heimlich maneuver on her. And it works, and she chokes up the food, and she's okay. Then he looks at her and says, wait a minute. You're the woman who saved my life 7 years ago. So here's a case where, you know, somebody saved somebody else's life, and then that second person saves the first one's life. So the nurse who saved the boy, who later saved her. So, you know, it's a pretty amazing story, right? It's fitting that it made the news, and certainly it seems incredible. And then a lot of people say, well, there was some sort of, you know, destiny involved, right? It was fate that, you know, she had to save his life so that he could save her life. And of course, this is the sort of story that fits in with a lot of things that we might want to believe, right? I mean, generally that, you know, you should be good to others so that they might be good to you. Here's a very direct example. Or the life you save may be your own. Well, yeah. So, you know, it's this amazing sort of story, right? You say, wow, you saved someone's life and later they save your life. But, again, we could ask, and as a skeptic or a humanist or a statistician, we could say, does this prove that that there was a magical force, right? That there was some karma that made her save his life so that he could save her life? Or was it just randomness? And I was actually interviewed by a TV documentary about this. They said, look, here's this incredible story. Come on, professor, this must be magical. You know, what are the odds of this happening? And to give you an idea where the TV documentary was coming from, it was called Supernatural Investigator. So they certainly thought this was proof of supernatural. And so what can I say about it? So I worked out some probabilities, and they're in sort of an endnote in the book, because the main book is just text, but there's some endnotes with details. And if you say, just take a specific pair of people, two people, and you say, what are the odds that one of them will save the other one's life, and the other one will save the first one's life? It's incredibly unlikely, right? So I work in one chance in billions of billions, depending on exact assumptions that you make. So it's incredibly unlikely, right? So you think, wow, that couldn't just be chance alone. But what's the catch? Well, the catch here was, this happened to this one pair out of all the different pairs of people that it could have happened to. So a bigger perspective, so I say, you know, what's the chance that some pair of people in some city in the United States where this was, at some point during my lifetime will save each other's lives? That to me is a more appropriate question, right? We don't want to say, what's the chance that these two people it would happen to? What's the chance that somebody somewhere would have this happen? And the thing is, first of all, there's lots of people out there. You probably know there's over 300 million people in the United States. But there's even more pairs of people out there, right? Pairs of people grow essentially as the square of the number of people. There's maybe you probably heard of the famous birthday problem trick where you say, well, if there's, let's say, 40 people in a room, what's the chance that some pair have the same birthday? And most people think, well, it's probably not that high because there's 365 days in a year and only 40 people in the room. But with 40 people in the room, there's 780 different pairs of people in the room. All the different ways you could match up one person with one other person. And with that many pairs, it's actually almost 90% sure that some pair out of those 40 will have the same birthday. So there's lots and lots of pairs of people out there. And if you look at pairs of people in the United States, even just ones who both know CPR, and even ones who live in the same city, to make it a little more realistic, there's still incredible numbers of pairs. And when you put that all together, you say the chance that some pair will have this incredible story that one will save the other's life and the other will save the first one's life, I work it out to about one chance in three that will happen at some point in my lifetime. So it's still a pretty amazing story, and it's, you know, I don't want to take away from the story at all, but do we need to believe there was a supernatural force that made this story happen? Well, no, right? Because it could happen by chance. And of course, another way to think of it is, out of all those pairs out there, if there really were a supernatural force, why wouldn't there be more of them who were saving each other's lives? Right? So, different perspectives you can take on it. So I call this luck trap the out of how many principle, or in this case, out of how many pairs, meaning that if something amazing happens and it seems really unlikely, and it is really unlikely for that particular person or that particular pair or that particular location, say, yeah, but out of how many similar things that could have happened? And then you start to realize some things aren't so unlikely after all. Let me mention one more. This one takes place on a beach in Hawaii. And what happens is this guy on your left, he was vacationing in Hawaii with his family. And he went to a beach near Honolulu. And he wanted them to take a picture. He wanted a picture of his family, so he saw this other guy. He said, hey, excuse me, sir, could you take a picture of our family? Here's our camera. So he does. This guy takes a picture of him and his family. And they get chatting a little bit. And one of them says, you know, your accent sounds like you're from central Massachusetts. So yeah, that's right. Well, I'm also from central Massachusetts. Okay, that's cool. And then they start, you know, where did you live? And where did you go? And who did you know? And so on. And at one point, one of them says, oh, did you know so-and-so? He goes, well, of course I knew so-and-so. He was my father. The person says, wait a minute, he was my father. So it turns out they're half-brothers, right? These random people meet on the beach. They're actually half-brothers. They've never met before. They're different ages, and their father had them at different times. The father's now dead, and yet here they are meeting for the first time randomly on a beach in Hawaii. Pretty amazing story, and sort of gets more interesting because actually the younger one on your right, he'd been sort of isolated and alone and going through a bit of a rough time. After they met, he sort of got to know the other family, and he had more of a sense of belonging, and he went to their family events. So it's sort of a heartwarming story too. So you say, you know, it's a striking story, it's a heartwarming story, it's really significant for them. But then you can say, you know, was it really just chance? And of course, in the retelling of the story, it gets a little more imbalanced that, you know, this family, well, they weren't planning to go to that beach, they just at the last minute decided to go, and this guy, he was actually working at a resort nearby, but he didn't usually come to the beach, he just had to go because one of the clients at the resort wanted sailing lessons and he had to go book it for them. So, it becomes more and more, wow, there must have been this magical force that, made all these people go to this beach near Honolulu. And so again, you can say, what are the odds of this happening, right? So, and as you can imagine, if you just say this particular pair of people, these, long lost, never having met half-brothers, what are the odds that they would meet on that day in that beach in that state, right? Incredibly unlikely. But as a statistician, what am I going to say? I'm going to say, out of how many different people that could have had that kind of encounter. So for this one, what I said it could happen by chance. And I said it was, again, out of how many principle. And in this one, I had to think a little bit. I had to say, well, how many pairs of people are there out there, let's say in the United States, where this was, that have that property that if they did happen to meet and start chatting, it would have a really significant effect on them, right? Because that's what happened here. There were long-lost half-brothers. One of them was feeling kind of isolated. They start chatting. It had a really significant effect. Then you think there's probably a lot of pairs like that, right? And I just tried to be conservative and say, well, how many people have some sort of story like that? And I actually know people who, have parts of the family they're estranged from or things they haven't seen. And I think it's very conservative to say one person in 1,000, and probably a lot more than that, but who have somebody out there that if they happen to meet them, it could be really important. And if you think about it that way, with over 300 million people in the United States, that's 300,000 people, right? So you can say out of maybe 300,000 different people out there that have somebody else that if they met them, it would be incredible. Then you say, what's the chance that some pair of them would meet? And you also have to assume, because we don't always meet new people, but probably at least once a day on average, you have some brief chat with somebody that you haven't met before. That seems like a very conservative estimate too. It's probably a lot more, the waiter at the restaurant and everything. So anyway, let's say if each person meets one new person a day, and there's 300,000 people out there that if they met, it would be an incredible story. I worked it out that there's about the chance that some pair would meet at some time this year is about 28%. So, it's not that unlikely, right? Now, you could argue maybe they wouldn't all be quite as dramatic a story as this one and so on, but the point is these incredible things will happen from time to time because of this out of how many principle. So that's kind of a perspective I take on it. So having said that, I'm just going to drink here. You could say, well, so far things have been a little bit on the, I don't know if maybe the negative side, or at least saying that these things that seem to be incredible and to have these deep meaning, maybe they don't have such a deep meaning. So then you say, well, how can we control randomness? And one thing that we know a lot about as statisticians is what happens over the long run, meaning if you sort of have repeated randomness. And the best way I like to think about this is at a casino. So I don't know if many of you go to casinos very often, but you've probably seen them from time to time, and certainly on TV and movies and so on. And let's talk in particular about the game called craps. So probably a lot of you know this game. You take a pair of ordinary six-sided dice, and you repeatedly roll them, and each time you look at the sum of the numbers. And the rules of craps are a little bit complicated. Maybe some of you know them. I'm not going to ask who doesn't know them. That might get weird, but let's say, here's the rule of craps. You roll a pair of dice and look at the sum. If the sum is a 7 or an 11, well, then you win right away. If the sum is a 2 or a 3 or a 12, well, then you lose right away. But if it's some other number, like let's say it's a 4, then you keep on rolling this pair of dice over and over again, looking at the sum each time, until you either get another 4 matching your first one, and then you win, or until you get a 7, and then you lose. So they're kind of complicated rules, I think. And you might say, why in the world would they have invented a game? It seems like a simple dice game, but it has these weird, complicated rules. Why would they do that? Well, as with many things, it comes down to probabilities. Because when you work it all out, it is not so simple. It's a good exercise for undergraduate statistics students. And you say, hey, can you work out the probability of winning? When you put it all together, the probability of winning at craps works out to 49.2929%. Which you probably notice is just under 50%. Right? You say, okay, well that's interesting. And of course, most casino games, the ones that only involve randomness, like craps, they have this kind of property, that they're pretty close to being a fair game, which is what makes them fun and interesting and exciting. But they're just weighted a tiny bit in the house's favor, right? They're a little bit less than a 50-50 game. And you could say, well, so what? Does that make much difference? And to illustrate that, I want to imagine the following situation. Suppose you keep on betting at craps, and each time you bet $10 at craps, And if you just make one bet, you have a 49.2929% chance of winning. But what if you keep on betting? And in particular, what's the probability you double your fortune, how much money you have, before you lose all your money? And in particular, let's imagine you start with $100. What's the chance you'll reach $200 before you get to zero? And if this works, I'm going to try to run a simulation. I know George was worried about me moving over, so I'm not in the camera screen, but I hope you'll forgive me, George. I'm going to see if this works. And let's see if this is going to work. Okay, so it's going to work. So what do I have here? This is a little schematic, a little program I wrote where you're starting with $100, and the black dot represents how much money you have. And each time you're going to bet $10, and you're going to win or lose. So if you win, you'll go up to $110. If you lose, you'll go down to $90. But I don't know what's going to happen. All I know is you have a 49.2929% chance. So the first time you won, congratulations, you went to $110. And then you're going to bet again. So on that run, you're going to bet, you won again. So you've won twice in a row, you're up to $120. Now you lost, you're back to $110 and so on. And any one bet, we know you have a 49.2929% chance. But the question is, what happens in the long run? And in particular, starting with $100, we're saying, what's the chance you'll get all the way up to $200 first before you lose all your money and get down to $0? Okay? So with me on that? So you can see you've already made, 12 bets and you're only up to $120. So it could take a while. Fortunately, I can speed up the simulation. So let's try it a little faster here. Let's see if that goes a little faster. So you're making bets. How are you doing so far? It looks like the humanists of Halton Peel are not doing too badly. You're about how long now you're doing a little worse, I'm sorry to say. So again, you started with $100, you can win. You had a really bad run there. Okay, you're fighting back. And the question is, are you going to get up to 200 before you lose all your money? I have to be honest, it's not looking good for you right now. But we're not going to give up hope just yet. If need be, I'll speed up the simulation again. Okay, you're making a bit of a comeback. Oh, very good comeback. You're back up to your 100. Wow, you're unstoppable. Okay, so I'm going to speed it up again. So there you're going. Okay, so you've now made, by the way, you made 75 bets already. So you can see it's going to take a while. There's a lot of ups and downs. Again, it's almost 50-50, right? Just, you also, congratulations. Congratulations. You, the Halton Field humanists have won $100. So that's exciting. And again, so we say, well, we started with $100. You had a 49.2929% chance of winning, otherwise you lose. And sure enough, congratulations, it was random. I didn't know what was going to happen. But you got up to $200. Let's do this again, but I'm going to change it slightly. So I'm starting it again, and you probably can't see, but if you look closely, you'll see that this time you're starting with $1,000, and now you're trying to get up to $2,000 first before you lose all your money, and you're still just betting $10 each time. So the relative bets are kind of smaller, and you can see that even though you've already made 70 bets, and you're not doing great, but you're still about, 850 or something, and you can see it's going to take a while. Fortunately, I can speed this up again, and now you're doing, this will show how many bets you've done. You've done almost 200 bets now. And you're still almost right back where you started from. And again, we're wondering, starting with 1,000, what's the chance you'll get all the way up to 2,000 first before you lose all your money? Well, we're going to go faster because they're around all day. So you're now going super fast. You've made 2,000 bets. You've made 3,000 bets. You've made 4,000 bets. 5,000 bets. You're still right back where you started from, pretty much. 7,000, 8,000, okay, sorry to say that after 9,702 bets, you lost that time. Let me do one more before I talk about the probabilities. So it's similar, but this time you're going to start with $5,000, if you can see that. Or we're saying, what's the chance you'll get up to $10,000 first before you lose all your money? And you're betting really fast. You've already made 7,000 bets, but you're only betting $10 each time. So you're still at, 4,500, 4,400 or something. It's going to take a while, fortunately. We can speed it up again. So we'll do a hyper warp speed here, and after 25,000 bets, 30,000 bets, after 36,340 bets, I'm sorry to say you lost all your money. So, alright, so what does that mean? Well, of course, what I really want to know is the probability. So here we can say, well, if you start with $100, what's the chance you'll get up to $200 before you lose all your money? The answer is you got about a 43% chance. This is what's called the gambler's room problem in probability theory. It's actually not that easy to solve, but we know how to solve it. And that wasn't too bad, and that's why I wasn't so surprised when you won, but I still congratulate you on winning the first round. Then we said, well, what if you start with $1,000? What's the chance you'll get up to $2,000 before you lose all your money. And in this case, you lost. I wasn't that surprised, but it wasn't so bad. It turned out you had about a 5.5% chance. But that's still quite a bit less, right? So you can see right away that even though you're starting with 1,000, trying to get to 2,000, if it was a 50-50 game, then you'd have a 50% chance. But it's a 49.2929% chance, and because you made so many bets, you actually only have about one chance in 18. And then what about the last one we did, where you started with 5,000? What's the chance you reach 10,000 before you lose all your money? Well, that works out to about one chance in 1.4 million. Incredibly unlikely. So the last one, I was pretty sure you weren't going to win. And if we kept going, if you started with 10,000, what's the chance you get to 20,000 before you lose all your money? Works out to one chance in 10 million billion. Okay? Just never going to happen, right? So this is a phenomenon. We call this the law of large numbers. And it says you keep on repeatedly doing a randomness, like in this case, betting $10 at craps, but you do it over and over again. And if you just bet a few times, anything can happen. But if you bet over and over again, it gets more and more likely that the overall fraction of wins will conform to the true probability, which in this case is just a tiny bit less than 50%. So it means over the long run, it's more and more certain that you're going to lose more than you win. And that's why when you have more and more numbers you're trying to do and you're doing more and more bets, it's more and more certain that you're going to lose. And this is why casinos make so much money, right? Because any one person at the casino might win or lose money if you just make a few bets. But with thousands and thousands of people making lots and lots of bets over time, it's more and more certain that the casino is going to win a profit. So this is the law of large numbers, and it doesn't just apply to craps. First of all, it applies to other games at the casino, so any game that involves chance. But also things like, let's say, a public opinion poll. Well, if you just ask a few people at random, you're not going to learn very much. But if you ask more and more people at random, the fraction of people who, let's say, are supporting a certain political candidate will get closer and closer to the true fraction by the law of large numbers again. Or if you're doing a medical study, if you just have a few patients that you try out on a new treatment or a new drug, they might get better or worse, and it might not prove anything. But if you have more and more patients, you get a more and more accurate sense of the true effect of your treatment or your drug. So we actually use this law of large numbers in different forms all over the place, and it's a good way to think about all sorts of things in life, that a few things could happen just by random chance, but over the long run, they're going to be more and more controlled by the law of large numbers. So that's kind of a perspective. What about, so we have this idea, long run randomness is something we understand pretty well. Does it have any bearing on things like these supernatural beliefs, right? And the problem, of course, is that a lot of these stories or supernatural beliefs, they're not experiments which are repeated over and over, and they're not controlled conditions, and it's not clear what the rules of the game are and so on. But every once in a while, people have tried to do more controlled analysis of these things. And here's one study I'll mention. This is from some years ago. They said, what about astrology? So all these people believe in, the power of the position of the planets at the time they were born, that it affects their personalities. Let's try to test it. And so they tried to set up a careful, controlled experiment. And here's what they did. They said, we're going to collect a bunch of astrologers, and these were certified professional astrologers that the Astrology Association said, yes, these are good people to use. And they said, each one of them, we're going to give them one, what's called a natal chart, which is to say, a chart of the positions of the planets at the time that somebody was born. And we're going to give them detailed personality profile questionnaires of 3 different subjects. And of those 3 subjects, one of them corresponds to that natal chart. One of them, these are the charts for the position of all the planets when they were born. The other 2 it's not. And the astrologers had to read these detailed personality profiles, 3 of them, and figure out which of the 3 was most likely to correspond to those positions of the planets at birth. So it seemed like a fair experiment. And here's what they did. They said, could the astrology determine it? And here was the results they got. So we had 116 different experiments, and in 40 cases, the person they said was the first choice was indeed the one who corresponded to the natal chart. So you say, well, okay, so they got 40 out of 116 correct. Is that good? And probably some of you can already see, well, first of all, it's worked out to about 34.5% correct. And then you want to say, well, is that good, right? And probably you can get a sense of it already, so is that convincing? Well, first of all, if they get 40 out of 116 correct, well, you have to compare that, as probably a lot of you already see, to what would happen if they just made random guesses without any knowledge from astrology. And if they just made random guesses, they had 1 chance in 3 each time, right? So right away we'd be saying, okay, well, by random guessing you should be able to get 1 in 3, or 33.3% on average. But they got 34.5%. So to be fair, they beat that, right? They did better than you get by random guessing, but only a little bit better, and probably you're already saying into your mind it doesn't really seem like it was enough better to prove anything. And as statisticians, this is the kind of stuff we do, so I'll just say a little more about it, that we always want to say, well, wait a minute, okay, this is a result that was a little bit better than the chance result, but as statisticians we'd say, was it significantly better? Was it enough better that it actually proved something? So, better than chance, but it's significantly better. And so one way to think about it is to do a simulation, and I'm going to once again come over here if this will work, and hopefully we'll see it here. So what I did here is an even simpler program I wrote, which it just simulates what would happen if 116 people each made a guess, and each had 1 chance in 3 of being correct. So this would be the random chance guessing. So hopefully this will work. I'll press return, and it'll kick out 116 answers. And you see that in this case, the first one was no, no, yes, no, and so on. And it adds it up for us and says, in this case, they got 36 correct out of 116, which is about 31%. So to be fair, this is a case where they did random guessing, and they did worse than the astrologers did, right? But, as statisticians, we say, let's do some more simulations, right? So we want to know what the chance they would do with these as well. Here's a case where they got 39 correct out of 116, which is almost as good, but not as good as the astrologers. 43. So here's a case where they beat the astrologers, right? They got 43 out of 116. Here's a case where they did way worse, only 32 out of 116. Oh, another one with 42 out of 116. Way worse, 34. Even better, 44. Worse, 39. Worse, 33. Worse, 37. 41. So you can see that we're getting different results when we do it. And from the point of view of statistics, what we want to know is, first of all, if you use simulations, you can see that getting 40 correct out of 116 actually will happen fairly often by chance alone, so it doesn't really prove anything. But to do it more carefully, we can actually compute this kind of probability, and we can compute that if you were guessing randomly, and you had a 1/3 chance each time, and you did it 116 times, you would get 40 or more correct about 43% of the time. So that means it's not very unusual at all, right? And this is what we sometimes call the p-value, which is to say, what's the probability that you would have gotten such a result just by luck, just by chance alone, right? And you can say, one thing I say in the book is you can think of statistics as saying when you see a result, is it just luck, right? Or is it something more? And in this case, I mean just luck in the sense that just by random guessing. And it seems that what the astrologers did, we can say, because this p-value is so large, it's not a small value like 5% or 1% that might indicate something. Then we can say it's not that large, so the astrologer's performance, we might say, was consistent with chance or was not significantly better than chance. And so we would say this experiment does not provide any evidence in favor of predictions of astrology, as you might have guessed. And there's actually been a number of other efforts to investigate astrological predictions in terms of different types of professions and what are their star signs and how does that conform to what astrologers predict will be their personalities of different signs and so on. And pretty much they've all had a null effect. And it's pretty much like this one, they have not provided any evidence, as I probably don't have to convince you, but we sure have to convince a lot of people out there, because a lot of people are heavily influenced by their astrological predictions, even though it seems pretty clear that there's not evidence to support that. So that's one point I want to make. I'm coming towards the end, but let me mention one thing. You see, it says, what about God? So in the book, I originally thought I'm not going to mention anything about God and religion, right? Because it's just too sensitive, there's too many, there's wars fought over these things, there's oppression, there's hatred, I don't want to get into that. But I sort of realized I couldn't avoid it, because somehow a lot of people, when you ask them, you say, hey, do things happen just randomly, or is there, a meaning to it, a purpose, a fate, a destiny, people deserve it, whatever. For a lot of people, that's tied up with their feelings about God and religion. And so even though it's kind of a delicate topic, I did put it in the book. When I give public talks, I must admit I usually don't talk about it, but I figured since we're all humanists here, maybe I was okay. So I'll just say a few words about, what can we say? What about God? Well, first of all, what I actually do believe, and I say in the book, and because it's a sensitive topic, is that a lot of people believe in religion as a matter of sort of personal, private faith, right? And in fact, the very word faith sort of implies that you believe something not because there is evidence to prove it, but because you just believe it inside you, right? And really as a statistician and really as a human, I don't really have a problem with that. Like if somebody says, I get my interpersonal strength or my sense of meaning or my sense of morality or something from my own personal religious beliefs, I figure that's their business and that's okay. But sometimes people say, no, actually here I got proof. Here's proof for the evidence of God, right? And that's where I think as a statistician, and maybe all of us as humanists, where maybe we can get involved, right? So, what is that proof again? So let me mention a couple things. One is a story that a friend told me, actually this some years ago, but they said, hey, I heard you don't believe in divine intervention. Oh, well, yeah, I don't really. Oh, yeah, well, listen to this story, she said. Well, I was driving with my husband, we were going on a car trip, and I looked down at my hand and I saw that the diamond on my engagement ring had fallen off. And it was gone, and I felt terrible. It was my engagement ring and my diamond, it was gone, and I looked all over the car, I looked everywhere, I couldn't find it anywhere, I felt so terrible. So I prayed to God to return my diamond. And I prayed and I prayed and I prayed. And then later we stopped at a rest stop, and I got out of the car, and I found the diamond in a fold of my shirt. So to her, that was proof of divine intervention, right? And in a fold of their shirt. So then of course, you can think about the story on all sorts of levels. One is you could say, well, did it really not, you're saying it wasn't in the fold of your shirt that whole time, then if not, where was it? And of course you could also, and I did eventually ask her, I say, well, if you really believe that God returned the diamond to you in the fold of your shirt, why did the diamond fall off in the first place? And she said, oh, well, that was the work of the devil. So that was her perspective. But nonetheless, again, as a statistician, we can say, well, and what did I say here? Is this divine intervention? Well, I'll come to something else. But this is an example of what I call sort of a biased observation, in the sense that I'm pretty sure that this person, over the course of their life, has lost other things that were pretty important to them. I'm pretty sure that sometimes they found it again later, and sometimes they didn't find it again later. And obviously she's saying that she did find it again, that was proof that God was helping her. Whereas what about when she didn't find it, or for that matter, what about when she lost it in the first place? So, to me, again, I think if you're looking for the confirmation, you'll find it, but to me that's not convincing, because it would have to be consistent that when you prayed things did get returned, and when you didn't pray they didn't get returned, and there was no such consistency here. But let me mention one more before I wrap up. This is, some of you may know this, recognize this picture, a guy named Ray Comfort, and he had a video where he said, the video was called Atheist Nightmare, some of you may have heard this, and he said, here's a video, here is proof of the existence of God. The existence of God is a banana. Why is that? Well, because think how incredibly convenient bananas are. They have this tab at the top, so they're easy to pull off and peel. And he also says they're shaped just right so that when you reach up your hand, they fit into your mouth. And they're shaped just right so they fit right into the crook of your hand. They're shaped just the same way as this part of your hand. So he said they're obviously so perfectly designed, they're the perfect proof of God, and therefore they're an atheist nightmare. And, so this is a case where somebody claims proof of God, and again, I think as statisticians or humanists, we can try to respond to that. And this one, it's hard to know where to start, right? There's so many things you can say in response. One is, the thing about the banana being shaped the right way, that just really doesn't seem to me to be any kind of convenience. So I can't put much stock in that. But the thing about the tab at the top, well, it's true, it's pretty convenient having that tab at the top of bananas. It's not perfect, right? If the banana's not that ripe, it might be hard to pull off, or if it's too ripe, it might be squishy, and also when you peel it, sometimes there's those stringy bits that will come off so well. So, not perfect, but, let's be fair, let's say, okay, yeah, that tab's actually pretty good, thank you for that. And, well, what else? Well, it's been pointed out that the bananas we eat today are actually very different from bananas a few hundred years ago. They're the product of agricultural engineering and science, really, and apparently bananas a few hundred years ago were sort of shorter and squatter, and they were full of seeds, and they did not have a convenient tab at the top, and they were actually much worse as far as this convenience goes. So you can say, okay, well, that's not a very good part of the argument, but of course, a religious person might say, yeah, but God gave humanity the wherewithal and intelligence to do the agricultural engineering to give us better bananas. So maybe you say that. Okay, but let's just say, okay, fine. So the world we're in today, yes, we have these bananas, and yes, they have these tabs on top. How's that doing for proof of God's existence, right? Well, you say, okay, let's take those as the terms. God's existence is going to be decided on the convenience of peeling fruit, right? So, I'm going to say it that way. But then you say, well, okay, great. So the banana has this nice tab on top. What about oranges? Right? Oranges don't have a convenient tab on top, and lots of oranges are pretty hard to peel without a knife. So right away, well, of course, the other thing I meant to say is that I don't see why this would be called an atheist nightmare, because I think most atheists, certainly including me, and probably including most of you, if we actually were confronted with convincing proof for the existence of God, that wouldn't be a nightmare. That would be new evidence to take into account, and we might modify our beliefs based on it. So that's another thing. But let's say, okay, fine. So he thinks it's proof of God. Evidence is welcome. But is this evidence convincing? And as I already said, I'd say not really, because what about oranges? And you can think of it as a sort of biased observation. Again, in the sense you're saying, well, here's one fruit that seems to be nice and conveniently designed. But what about all those other fruits which aren't as conveniently designed? So if there were a God who decided the most important thing he could do for us was make our fruit easy to peel, why wouldn't he have done that for the other fruit too? So I said this, and I thought it was pretty clever, but then when I was starting to give talks and I was looking for an image about it, I found other people had come up with similar ideas and maybe stronger. So here's a case where someone made their own poster and they said, listen, if bananas prove that God designed the world with humans in mind, then the coconut proves that God is an asshole. And of course, it's a stronger version of what I was saying, but it's true that never mind oranges, coconuts are really hard to get open, right? So again, I think there's a biased observation there. So let me wrap up, and then I know if you're going to maybe do a Q&A and you're welcome to get a book to go on, I'm happy to sign any books, but let me wrap up a little bit and say that when I give talks like this, I get a response, and I'm sure some of you get it when you tell people you're humanists and rationalists and free thinkers and all these good things. People say, so you're saying that's all there is? You're saying, this world we have, that's all there is, right? And again, it's, there's no magic, there's no supernatural, there's no fate, there's no destiny, there's no karma. And it's something that, I try to take seriously in the book and think about, well, am I saying that? And in a way, I am, right? And in a way, we are. Because, I say, I do believe that in our world, not in fiction, where there's all this magic and isn't that fun, but in our real world, I do think it follows the laws of science. I do think there's things that happen randomly, and they follow the laws of probability, and we can try to understand them. And by using luck traps and things statistically, we can see things when they don't really prove a certain magical force and so on. So I do kind of believe that. I believe that statistics and logic, as I'm sure a lot of you do, can help us to clarify the real world. But also, of course, I say, when we have been able to do controlled experiments, they almost always show no effect for these supernatural forces, so there really doesn't seem to be evidence for them. But then you say, well, is that such a bad thing, right? And maybe I'll just tell you one last quick story, which is, I was, after my first book came out, I was doing a lot of talks, and I gave a big talk in Waterloo to over 600 people, and the talk went really well, and then there was a book signing, and I was signing books, and then they said, oh, we'd like you to meet this couple. And this middle-aged couple came up, and they said, oh yeah, we'd like you to sign our book. Sure, that's great. They say, oh, but we'd like you to make it out to our son. Oh, sure, no problem, I'll do that. And they say, our son is dead. I said, really? Your son is dead? Yeah, he died of cancer as a teenager. And I mean, it's just, such a horrible thing. You can't even imagine somebody, parents whose son dies of cancer as a teenager, right? And they said, yeah, but, as he was dying, he took great comfort from your probability book. I said, really? How could he take great comfort from my probability book? I said, well, to him, the book showed him that this horrible thing that happened to him of getting cancer as a teenager, it wasn't his fault. It wasn't his fate. It wasn't his destiny. He didn't deserve it. It was just random, right? And so, wow, what a thing to do. And, I tried to sign the book as best I could, but it stuck with me, as you can imagine. And part of the reason it stuck with me is that, why do we always want things to have to happen for a reason? Because there's destiny and people deserved it, and it was meant to happen. And if something horrible happens, like a teenager getting cancer, it just makes it worse if you say there was a reason for it or he deserved it, right? So, actually, things happening randomly is not necessarily a bad thing. I mean, a lot of bad things happen randomly, and a lot of good things happen randomly, and we can try to deal with it, but the fact that they didn't have a cause is not necessarily a bad thing. So that's one perspective. Another perspective, well, I already said we can still enjoy all these amazing stories and fictional magic and all these great things out there. I don't think it has to lessen our enjoyment just because we believe in a rational approach to things. But also, and I'm sure you'll agree with me on this, trying to figure out how the world actually works is actually a great thing too, right? It's a whole fascinating voyage of discovery, which you don't have if you pass things off as being supernatural. So, you know, the real world has so many amazing things in it, right? Meaning all your interesting people and all the beautiful technology and scenery and places you can go and people you can meet and things you can do. You know, how can people say this is all there is? So in a way, I end up not supporting this kind of argument. So much that we can do based on what's real. So I think we can embrace the world as it really is. I guess I'll probably leave it there. Let's just say that, you know, if you do want to know more about me and so on, you can go to my webpage, probability.ca. You can email me, you can tweet about me. There's Struck by Lightning books available, and happy to take questions. But I think I'll wrap up there and just thank you again for having me here.
Thanks very much, Jeffrey. And now it's your turn to ask questions.
So when you're talking about the laws of probability, this universe that happened and the earth we live in, the earth that happened, so you put that under this law of probability of happening?
You're saying the Earth being here, or like humans involved in it?
Earth being, and we are being here.
Yeah.
And the universe actually happened, this happened, right?
Yeah, well, it's a good question because I do get asked that sometimes. You know, you say, well, what are the odds that all sorts of things that we live on a planet that was at just the right temperature and that had water and that it ended up having organic molecules and then those eventually evolved into life and then that evolved into intelligent life. Like all these incredible things had to happen for us to be here. And people want to say, yeah, what are the odds of that happening, right? And of course, that's one thing a lot of our religious people say it couldn't have happened except by the hand of God. So, yeah, it's a bit of a hard one. I mean, certainly a lot of incredible things had to happen for us to be here today. I'm not just talking about the traffic on the QEW, right? But there's a lot of things that had to happen for us to be here. And, it's incredibly unlikely. Partially, I think in terms of what I'll call the out of how many principle again, because we're learning that there are billions and billions of planets just within the visible galaxy, or visible universe. So you can say, this incredible thing had to happen, but it happened on one planet out of all these billions and billions of them. So I think that's, one sort of perspective to put on it. There's something called the Drake equation that you may have heard of, which is a guy named Francis Drake who said, he's going to try to quantify this. So he said you basically take how many planets are there, but then you multiply that by all those things. The probability will be at the right temperature, the probability of water, the probability of organic matter, the probability it will evolve, the probability it will become intelligent, and so on. And then, the problem is it's really hard because we're getting some idea of how many planets there are, but we don't have very good ideas for the probability that organic matter would originate and so on. And I should say actually that Larry Moran, who's here, we were actually talking a little bit about this, and he is a biologist that has a lot of perspectives on this too, and certainly it's an incredible thing that happened for us to be here. I'm glad that it did. I do think that basically just because there's so many planets out there, so many billions and billions. What's that?
And time.
Well, time, yeah, that's true too. Yeah, it didn't happen overnight, right? It took billions of years and billions of planets. So, but it's still amazing that it happened. And, I don't want to totally dismiss the sense of wonder that things as complicated as human beings could have evolved somewhere. But, I know to some religious people, that's the reason they believe in God. They don't think it could have happened naturally. I don't share that. I do think it could have happened naturally, but I do think it's still incredible that we're all here. So I guess I'll leave it at that. For the questions over there, yeah.
Sort of regarding a lot of pedestrian deaths.
Right.
Were there some factors to take in, like the season, the weather, and some of the other backlash that come with that?
That's a good question. Yeah, I mean, I guess the most honest answer is that I did a pretty quick analysis for the media, and I did not take all those subtle things into account. Probably if you'd been working with me, you would have done a better job. But also, I mean, there wasn't a huge seasonal effect. Like, I was looking over previous years, and it seemed like there's a lot of random fluctuation from month to month, not a huge seasonal effect. But it's a good point. There could have been some. This was during a winter month, actually, and I think if anything, there'd be a little bit more in the summer because more people are out and about in the summer. But there wasn't a huge seasonal effect. But it's a good point. And I think with that story, and really with a lot of these stories, you can analyze them at more and more of a deep and careful level. But I think to some extent you don't even really need to, because the main point is just that some of these things that happen actually aren't so unlikely to happen. And then sure, with a more careful analysis, you could get a little more accurate in terms of the probabilities, but you're never going to say exactly the probability of it happening, but you're just going to say it's not that unlikely to happen.
So you examined it on an annual perspective?
Well, I mean, I had monthly figures, but there was not a huge seasonal effect, but I didn't go into as much detail as I could have. There you go.
There was a famous biologist named Stephen Jay Gould who died 20 years ago. He was very interested in probability statistics. In fact, a lot of his ideas are based on anything with chance rather than anything else. He was also a big baseball fan. And he once wrote an article about hitting streaks.
It's Joe DiMaggio, right?
In baseball. And for the most part, they're not unusual. They're what you would expect them. But if you hear sportscasters on TV, whether it's basketball or hockey or, you know, he's got a hot hand, he's on easy, move him up in the batting order and whatnot. It's just not true.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it's a good point. Well, first of all, I thought you were going to mention the Joe DiMaggio hitting streak where he got in 56 games in a row. And in fact, I mentioned that a little bit in the book because, Stephen Jay Gould, he claimed, I think there's something to it that hitting streak, he says, is, outside of the norm. It was like so much above the second place that actually it meant something. And I do talk about that in the book a bit, and I think there's something to that. In fact, one interesting thing I learned is that the Heinz Ketchup Company was going to pay him a lot of money if he got into 57 games in a row because of their Heinz 57, but he only got to 56. But nonetheless, that was outside the norm. But I think your broader point is certainly true that people tend to see patterns even when there aren't any. I mean, one simple thing, actually, here's an interesting experiment that's a bit related in fact, I've done this with students where you say, we're going to divide the students into two groups. One group of students, I want you to flip a coin 100 times and just record what happened. The other group, I want you to make up 100 coin flips. You don't get to flip a coin, you just get to make it up. And usually, as a statistics professor, you can tell which was which. How do you tell which is which? Because when people are making up coin flips, they think, well, they're probably going to pretty much alternate, or maybe there'll be a couple heads in a row, but they tend to minimize how often you might have, say, 6 or 8 heads in a row, right? Whereas the people who flip the coin are going to have more extreme things. So you can look at statistical things. And the point is that people think that if it's truly random, it has to pretty much go back and forth, or maybe 1 or 2. And then if it doesn't, if there are, say, 5 heads in a row, or, 5 hits in a row, or whatever it is, that's really outside the norm. That's an incredible pattern. Whereas really, that's the way randomness works. There's actually a lot more fluctuations in randomness than people appreciate. So you're right, with sports stuff, people say, oh, this is, the 3rd week in a row that they've won on a Tuesday in the 7th inning or whatever. And you say, well, how do all the days they could have won and all the different games, it's actually very unsurprising that this would have happened. So I think there's quite a lot of that, absolutely.
I worked in drug studies, so I really related to what you had said about the statistics and the range of subjects that were applied to the phases. And then I also worked with palliative patients.
Okay.
And I had a lot of struggles with my beliefs, being humanist, and their beliefs in the world as it really is, like their narrative. And do you speak to the power of hope in any of either of your books?
Yeah,
and it really helped, even though it conflicted with my beliefs, I really felt it helped them when I spoke to them with their narrative.
Yeah. Yeah, well, I do say something, because I agree that these things can get tricky, right? And I think we probably assume we should avoid being too dogmatic in the sense of, you can't have any belief like that, they're wrong. I do talk about, I have a good friend from university, in fact, who married another good friend from university, and they had 2 kids, and then the man got leukemia. He got like a rare form of leukemia, he went to hospitals for a few years, and then he died. And the family was somewhat religious, and they had a religious funeral for him, and talked about religion with their young children. And of course I didn't contradict them, but also I didn't want to contradict them. Like, I thought if that's working for them and that's helping them to find the comfort that they need, for these poor kids who just lost their father to leukemia, then, who am I to say anything different? So, I do think there is something to that. I do talk in the book, it's true that my own mom actually died a year and a half ago from pancreatic cancer, and that was just when I was finishing up the book, so I put in a section about that actually, partially because some people say, okay, maybe you're not religious now, but when someone close to you dies, you're going to imagine them in heaven and so on. Anyway, I didn't. I didn't have any such feelings. And one aunt said something like, oh, well, at least now she's with the people that she knew before. And to me, that just didn't speak to me at all. So, I think probably when in the face of tragedy, people cope in all different ways. And I certainly agree with, I think your broader point is that we should accept people coping however they want to, and certainly trying to find something hopeful or positive, however it may be, that may be a good thing. Let's say, it's not going to make me religious, but if it helps them, then I can certainly accept that. So we're back, yeah.
How do you what perspective do you take on the people that we seem to know in our lives who seem to have luck. They seem to be lucky in some way. They win draws or random things more often than not, or they just seem to be that their life, a lot of their circumstances just seem to work out for them. And then we know people that just seem to be unlucky, or we characterize them as that. So do you see that as like a self-fulfilling prophecy, that they start out that way, or is it possible that there are people that just seem to defy the distribution?
Yeah. So, yes, I mean, it relates to the Willie Macy movie, right, where he's so unlucky, he's just by nature. So, to me, I mean, I try to distinguish, first, I mean, there's sort of three things to distinguish. One is that good things can happen because you've prepared really well, and you studied really well, and you've worked really hard, and you sought out all the opportunities when you had them. So that I wouldn't really call luck at all. That's really just the effort that you've made, but people might take it that way. Oh, he's lucky he got that job. Well, no, he actually studied for 5 years to get that job, right? So that's one thing. But then even the things which are completely outside of our control, let's say if really good things happen to somebody, well, some people would say, well, that means he's got some magical power that makes these good things happen, versus you can say these good things just happen to happen. And the difference would be, so this person's had good things so far, does that mean necessarily that tomorrow they're going to have more good things, or tomorrow could they have a bad thing? So that could be a case where I might part company with some people who believe in these magical forces, and they believe he's just inherently lucky, there's some magical property. Just like I didn't believe in the William H. Macy character, I wouldn't believe in that either. But as I say, look at this guy, he's had all these good things happen to him by luck. I'd say, sure, well, that's going to happen, right? And again, it's sort of an out of have anything with all the people here. Just by random chance, some of us, a lot of things are going to happen really good, and some of us, a lot of things are going to happen really bad. The question is whether just because something good happened before, that means I have magical luck properties and something good's going to happen next time. And that's where I'd say no. If it really was luck as opposed to good preparation and hard work and so on, then just because you had good things before does not in any way imply that it's going to come back. Although at the end you did mention a self-fulfilling prophecy, and I guess you could imagine, it gets back maybe to your question about attitude, right? That maybe if you have a positive attitude, those things have happened to you before, maybe you're going to find the opportunities the next time too. So that I wouldn't really call luck. But if you mean the randomness that happens to you, just because a lot of good random things have happened to you in the past, doesn't mean that the next things that are going to happen are random either. It's also a bit like with the gambling, we did the gambling situation. Just because you're on a roll and you've won 5 times in a row, it doesn't make it any more or less likely that you're going to win the next bet, or not. More questions or wrap up? Or, okay, go there.
I want to know if you have a perspective on the fact that with all the preparation, you still need that lucky break, right? There can be people who are prepared as ever, who just never get their break, and other people who do, right? You know, they happen to stumble upon it, and not really a question, but just what's your perspective on that? That everyone's success is part, all of that preparation, all of that study, and everything that you put into it, but it also needs that lucky break that everyone kind of gets.
Yeah, well, absolutely. I mean, I think everyone who's had success, absolutely, as you say, it's going to be some combination of the things that they've done, which aren't really luck, the preparation and the hard work and so on, and the randomness that happened to fall into place. So, but again, I take all that as being luck of what I call luck of the first kind. That is just random things that happen to us that can have a big impact. Not that, oh, therefore it was my fate to happen, or there was a magic force that made it happen. But yeah, absolutely.
So speaking of like baseball casinos and things like that, you would expect that real life results kind of match or align to the actual probability theory side of things. Are there any patterns that you've seen in life that actually are more often expected or less often expected than what the theory would suggest? Or does everything actually just fall within normal probability range?
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's a good question in a way, because of course, anytime you say, well, there's a certain probability of things happening, of course, there's also a certain probability of them happening differently, right? So we're just usually talking about averages or long run or out of a lot of things and so on. Yeah, as far as things happening outside of normal, it's funny, we already mentioned the Joe DiMaggio example. Some people say that was one hitting streak that was outside what we would tend to expect. I tend to think that mostly if you have a broad enough perspective and an accurate enough way of looking at things, then things that happen do pretty much fall within what we would expect. But sometimes the problem is it's hard to specify what the probability should be and so on. And well, we already had the discussion of the life evolving on Earth, and some people say, well, that was more than we could expect to happen. But yeah, it's hard to say. And a lot of times it depends on, as I say, how you define things like these stories. They're incredible stories, but then you say, well, let's take a bigger perspective on all the different things that could happen. So I tend to believe that for the most part, if you take a broad enough and accurate enough perspective over a long enough time involving enough people, that things tend to approximately follow the probabilities, but they're never going to exactly follow it because that's what randomness is. It's just random stuff. Yeah, that's a good question, but I say for the most part over the long run, we'll leave it at that. If you take one last question, or Jeff, get a last question here. Sure.
Do you find that double-blinded studies in medical is sufficient? Do you find that the parameters for medical studies and pharmaceutical studies are sufficient?
Yeah. Well, they're certainly not always sufficient. I mean, certainly the idea of being double-blind, I mean, it's pretty interesting. Like, it seems obvious that if a patient's being given a pill, let's say, you don't want the patient to know if it's, the real pill or placebo and so on, so you want to be blind to the patient. But the double-blind, in the sense of the experimenter being blind, is an interesting one. Like, I might have thought, well, why is that so important? But, of course, the problem is that the experimenter might inadvertently indicate something, and also if the experimenter has to evaluate the result, they say, oh yeah, this guy seems to be getting better because they know he took the new pill and they think it's better. So that's why double-blind is important. As far as whether it's sufficient, which is the end of your question, I mean, that's harder to say. Clearly, one big problem in the pharmaceutical industry is when the experiments are funded by the drug companies, and in particular, if the drug company is allowed to choose afterwards whether the study gets published or not, then, and I talked about that in the first book, Struck by Lightning, that's a huge issue, right? Because here's how I can prove that any pill is great. I'll just hire 100 different famous researchers, give each of them lots of money, and say, you do your study, and you find the patients, and you tell me if it improved them or not. If you come back and say, yeah, it improved them, then I'm going to publish the results, and I'm going to put it on all the billboards. If it doesn't, then I'm just going to hush it up, and I'm not going to let you publish it. If you have the right to do that, then, out of 100 studies, there'll be at least one that will show just by chance that it worked, and that's a good way to do it. So, and in fact, that has been a big problem in the past, but then some of the big medical journals in more recent years have recognized this problem, and they've had various rules, either that you have to register the study before you do it, so that you're going to publish it either way, or at least that the funding rules, because a lot of times the pharmaceutical companies funding the study, has to be such that the experimenter is allowed to publish the results no matter how they turn out. And to me, those things are essential because that avoids this sort of publication bias where you can hush up the studies that don't work. So there's a lot of issues like that. I mean, other issues could come up depending on the design of the study. I mean, there's a lot of people talking about what's called the replicability crisis in medical studies, and in some other studies too, where one study shows this pill seems to really work, but then the next study shows the opposite. And that's going to happen. I mean, to some extent, that happens just because of the randomness and the difficulty of designing your experiment really well. But I don't know. I mean, again, maybe Larry has his own perspective, but something we can discuss over a beer, I think. Okay, great. Thank you.